In this video, we're going to look at retirement distribution planning using the custom cash flow analyses in Asset Map Platform's target maps. Now, before we dig into these target maps that I've already created and begin to modify them, let's take a look at something that we covered in a previous video, which was cash flow up to retirement. The reason I want to point this out is because for today's video, I don't want to create quite as many categories on the what you want side, but rather take a simpler approach that's similar to how people currently or usually budget for various expenses, and that is by using broad categories of different types of spending. So once a client has filled out some sort of lifestyle expense worksheet or spending or budget analysis worksheet, now what we want to do is create a custom target map in which we can dive in and take a look at where the various incomes are going to be coming from. So for this example, we kept it very simple with living expenses, but we might go to the What You Want tab and potentially we could add other items like an inheritance, and maybe they want $1 million as of age 95 until age 96. We'll give it a full 1 year cash flow with a 3% or maybe 2% COLA on this. So in today's dollars, that's 484,000, and that means that they're only 70% funded for retirement if we include that legacy. But let's take a look at what they have. Now we can see that they have pension income, and we might go in here and actually make an adjustment on the COLA if their pension does in fact have a COLA of some kind, and make it accurate to that point. Social Security here, we can take a look at, and maybe we'll make it match the pension, which ended at the age 97. 20 or 1% COLA might be fair for that, but let's reduce the taxes a little bit on that. Now, we can either use the present value and simply use the assets that they currently have, or if there's some guarantees or other cash flows that we want to assume that they can pull off of these assets, we can go ahead and go into these distributions as an example and put in our tax loss, our age, if they annuitized it. And based on the illustration or the guarantees, we might then begin to include some various cash flows. So in the end, the output is going to look like it's going to be a one-page PDF that compares, on the one hand, the various categories of spending that a client wants, and on the other hand, on the what you have side, the cash flow sources and the assets on an after-tax basis that they have available to fund that cash flow. Now, the advantage of doing a target map for this analysis instead of using the more detailed and in some cases prettier financial planning options out there is that rather than getting into the weeds and looking at the details of how the distributions are going to be playing out over the years, which of course the advisor has to guide through the whole process for that to work anyway, and it's going to change. But the other advantage is that we now, using this one-page analysis, we can see that there's a shortfall, and potentially we can also go into, if we go into the analysis for this cash flow, we might even clone this and then look at a alternate scenario and what impact, for instance, a growth rate assumption might have. Can they afford to take more risk? It reduces their deficit. Or if they can't, and we want to assume only a 5% net growth rate, then we might instead look at what would the impact be of a long-term care event. If Janet needed to spend, let's say, $85,000 from the time that she was 90 until she was 97, which would be longer than the average, but let's just take a look at it. And let's say that nursing home costs have been increasing by 4 to 5%. So we might use a 4% COLA on this. What would be the impact of a 2 age 95 with for Janet? Now here we can see, because we've created this clone, now we can have a meaningful conversation by looking at the overview of these target maps and knowing that there's only one difference between the original scenario and the cloned scenario is, do we want to do anything about this deficit? Or potentially we might dig into this and say, well, if you're comfortable selling off your home and we hadn't already included that, then possibly we can use the family home. That's your buffer. And assuming it doesn't lose its value, you could sell that to fund a long-term care event. But the important thing is to have the conversation around things that could potentially happen and the options and what the client wants to do.